Welcome to the Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Here's your host, Bishop Larry Gators.
Thank you so very much, Brother Andrew. Welcome back to another edition here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. We are nationally syndicated through the Life Radio Network, 92.9 FM, 1460 AM on your dial, and we're also internationally syndicated through both the iHeart Radio Network and the iHeart Media Group, also in New York City, New York. All right, 609-614-3801. Again, beloved, 609-614-3801. And you can also listen to us live online at liferadionj.com. Again, quickly, beloved, liferadionj.com. And last but not least, if you want to email in your questions tonight, please do so right now and throughout the duration of tonight's broadcast on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, quickly, beloved, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Saints of God, I am so excited, so very honored. And again, we're just going to begin to unpack of what's going on in our country right now. You know, first, it was the death of Kobe Bryant, then the unleashment of COVID-19, then a worldwide global shutdown, which, according to many experts, is the greatest global house arrest in human history, and now George Floyd. So I am so very excited to have back with us our regular, a true man of God, true soldier of fortune, a true patriot here in the United States. He is pro-God, pro-life, pro-Bible, and pro-Trump, and that is Pastor Scott Kesterson. He is the CEO and the president of the Bards of Wars Ministries. And please go to his website right now, bardsofwar.fm, bardsofwar.fm. And you can listen to him each and every week on the Bards of War podcast, the Bards of War podcast there on YouTube. Man of God, thank you again so very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be back with us tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
Bishop, it's always a pleasure to be here. I think we're going to have another fantastic show as we kind of explore some of the darker aspects of what we're really fighting.
Absolutely. 609-614-3801. And you know, to the people of God out there throughout the world and to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, we're going to continue this very unique topic that is really heavy on our hearts concerning the unfortunate death of George Floyd, but there are some demonic forces who are nothing more than Baphomet Luciferian puppet masters who are pulling the strings in order to bring in a new world order, in order to establish the foundation of a communistic caliphate. And we're going to be talking about the paradigm of manipulation, the paralysis of emotion. Man of God, can you lead us into the mind of God in prayer in Jesus' mighty name?
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, please guide us this evening and bring all of us to this place to open our hearts and minds to see the truth, with eyes to see and ears to hear and breath to speak. Lord, these are complicated times, a world swirling with deception in which everything that we trust seems to fall to the hands of darkness. And as we reveal the truth through the light, we ask that you'll guide us with strength and no fear, and to always remember that we are strong with you, and only to you do we kneel. And we say these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you so much, man of God. 609-614-3801. The paradigm of manipulation, the paralysis of emotion. Man of God, let's pick up where we left off last week concerning these riots and how the deep state is so meticulously manipulating both the historical pain and the historical trauma of not just Black Americans, but all Americans who have suffered from a multiplicity of different types of trauma. So what has God revealed to you this week compared to last week as to the current state of our union right now?
Well, I think one of the things that's very interesting is we kind of begin and I want to begin on this Confederate issue, because this is probably going to be one of the most difficult things for our nation to unpack. The war of aggression, of northern aggression, as the southern states refer to it, and the war of the Civil War, as the northern states refer to it, has been written in a very defined history. That history is very simple in the way it's presented, and that is that the southern states were slave owners and they were fighting for the right to have slaves, and the northern was saving the world and unifying the nation and not allowing a separatist union of states to leave and to keep people enslaved. That is not what that war was ever about. And this is where we have to begin, because of how easy it is to manipulate, and also why it's so important that these riots are moving to try to erase this history. The principal issue around the Confederate fight was based on state sovereignty. And it was never, ironically, there was only 1 to 2% of the elites in the South that still had slaves. And I'm going to be very clear. I mean, this is an abhorrent practice. I don't want to, but we also have to remember that there were still slave owners in the North. And so there was a hypocrisy right from the beginning. But what was at stake can be best identified by the 2 preambles of the Constitutions. So I'm going to read here just 2 preambles, and I want to highlight some key words. The preamble of the U.S. Constitution reads like this: "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity to ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America." That's what we currently have. Now listen to the preamble of the Confederate Constitution. This is very important. "We, the people of the Confederate States, each state acting in a sovereign and independent character, in order to form a permanent federal government, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, invoking the favor and guidance of Almighty God, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the Confederate States of America." And this is an unbelievable erasing of a principal issue of history. The southern states had the right by the original Constitution to secede from the Union. This is something very few people understand, is that it was a general agreement that all the colonies would come together, states, first colonies and states, would come together and agree to a common bond of the Constitution. But sovereignty was a critical fight from the very beginning. There were those that sought to have a strong federal presence, and there were many who sought to have no federal presence, that they would agree to the binding of the Constitution, but the individual states had a right to be sovereign and to guide themselves. Now, this is important because if we follow the history, we never saw the prosecution of the Confederate generals, because had they had to do that, they would have had to admit that the southern states had the right to secede. So this is, again, one of these incredible rewrites, and we're racing, even from the beginning, to rewrite the intentions of history. The question is, what was the Civil War really about? And it comes down to really where the same fights are today. The elites trying to control the entire game, the game board. And when we get deep into the principles of economics, southern state agriculture was very independent. Northern state agriculture was very incorporated, and they were trying to force that sort of corporate model on the southern states. The slave issue, as abhorrent as that practice is, was already almost gone in the southern states. It had proven to be economically unviable and socially untenable. And so now we are seeing an erasing of this part of the history, because if we get truly to the core of this, we start to discover that the entire premise of the history that the Luciferians wrote from the beginning was a lie to everybody. So this is a dramatic issue here because the principle of the Constitution of the Confederate States actually speaks more true to what we assume that our current state is, that each state is sovereign. And it also provides, ironically, it provides a potential roadmap for the future, which we can talk about later. But where we are right now is we are in complete and total chaos. And it is easy to see, or we can witness, how easy it is to inflame people over issues that they historically do not have understanding or relevant knowledge of. So we're in the process right now of erasing history. Now, regardless of what I've stated here, erasing history means that you want to forget that which you did and to rewrite it in a way that is better for the ruling elite. That is always the case. As they say, history is written by the victors. And so we are witnessing an attempt right now to expunge a history for many reasons. One is to expunge the principles of actually who was the slavery class. That's the Democrat Party. The other is to erase a history that would reveal that states, in fact, did have sovereign status and could have seceded from the Union, another very critical point. And another principle of a group of states that, rather than seeking a Masonic generality of God, were literally calling out to Almighty God as their binding force in the southern states. One of the greatest contradictions that occurs when people don't look closely is to ask themselves a simple question, and that is, if the Confederate States were so slave-driven, why were so many Black Americans willingly joining the Confederate Army? They weren't being by force. They were fighting for the Confederate South. So again, we end up with this very typical kind of Masonic Luciferian rewrite of history where there's truth and lies on both ends to the middle, to completely distort and forever create a wedge and a wound in our society. Today, as we see this happening, the southern states are proud of their history. They're proud of having fought for sovereignty of states. And ironically, there is probably at this stage in the game, and I'm speaking in some generalities, but there is probably less racial tension in the South than there is in other parts of the country, which should say something, because we're seeing so many of these explosions occurring in the northern states. And yet, the minute that they start to occur, we notice how quickly they change the vector of anger towards that of the southern issue, when it's not about the southern issue at all. It isn't. It's about manipulating people, about creating a rift within race. God did not create people by preference and deference to color. He created all of us. And to that, we are as one being to come to him, and each of us has our trials and struggles, but the challenge is for us to find unity and strength within one another through him and through faith. And that is exactly what the Luciferian order fears the most.
So the very essence of the Civil War had nothing to do with the system of slavery. Am I correct in saying that? It had nothing to do with slavery, but more of an economic power structure, North versus South. What say you, sir?
Yes, and that's principally it. It isn't to say that slavery was not an issue. I want to be very clear about this, because it was still very, very, there was enough of it in the country. It had to be solved. And a practice like that is abhorrent. There's no excuse for it. But at the same time, when we start to look at what was happening in the North and the South, you'll find that there were slaves all over. This practice that was being done as an economic practice has a long history, not just from Africa. I mean, and I'm not taking away from the issue here. So this is not to excuse. But when we go back into history, we find that one of the greatest slave traders of all time were the Vikings, that were trading half of Europe into slave trade into the Russian Cossacks. Right. And then later, Vikings fell. We found that the Vikings were put into slavery by the same people they were fighting. It has been an abhorrent human practice over time. Today, the slave practice has taken a new form. It's what we call sex trafficking. It is taking the form of the slave trade that they put, the slave sex trade that they put people in. And worse, they have turned this same practice of, and now this is my position, it may offend people, and I'm sorry if it does, but the practice of the way our sports teams work is nothing more than creating slaves that are well paid. That's it. You're trading human beings on an open market for money. What's the difference? I mean, think about this. Think about the idea of when a slave trader would come in and they would stand the slave up on a blocks, and they would look at them and assess their physical physique and decide whether they were good for this or that and bid on them. What is the difference between that and taking a football person who's up here and goes into the first round, second round, fourth round? The only reason it's palatable is because, one, they get well paid, and two, they entertain us. That's it. But when you start looking into what they're actually involved in, like the requirements of them to play or not get paid, these people leave broken. I mean, there is a whole discussion that you hardly can find, but it is a very real discussion about former NFL players that can't get health care insurance, can't get coverage because their bodies are so broken and they are literally ruined for life. But they were paid an extra number of dollars and required to pay. For us here, we sit down and we watch it on TV. We root on our sports teams, but we're watching a modern day slavery is what we're watching.
Yes.
And it's what's even more captivating about it is that because the money is being offered, and this is going to be something I guarantee is going to upset somebody, but I'm just going to say it. Any time in history, if slaves had been paid a high wage and been economically satisfied, we would not hear much about it in terms of resistance to it. That's just the way it is. It's abhorrent to me because we have to be very honest with ourselves about the world in which we're facing, right? And as we dig under the covers and we go down into the South, I go back to that preamble, and I'm struck by the fact that the southern states that are still very strong in faith, and the black communities in particular in America are deeply strong in faith in the South. I look at that preamble and I say, that preamble is unique because it literally calls on Almighty God. So what was the real fight about? We know that part of the fight was economics. We know that slavery was an issue, but just because the South was, quote, defeated, the slavery issue and the equality issue didn't resolve itself right away. That was a long process. And it took a long time before we saw some level of social parity for people of all Americans. So what we did see, though, is we saw over the following years after the Civil War ended, or as the Southerns call it, the War of Northern Aggression, there was an economic punishment that was put in place to punish them for what they did, to try to break their back economically and to continue the impoverization of the South. And that continued and did happen. So we've seen it's a very big distortion in our history that has become very vibrant right now because it's a very easy trigger to your point of old scars, right? It's a very easy trigger to deflect people from what the real issues are at hand and to point them away. The Democrat Party, which is a big part of, is not exclusive to the deep state, is all about division, splitting people. That is ultimately the Luciferian order. Keep everybody at anger and context and contesting each other. And when one narrative dies, they place in effect another narrative. So the COVID-19 fake pandemic went a certain route and suddenly started to lose momentum. So we had to come up with something new. And that will lead us into George Floyd here in a moment. And so we get into George Floyd. And that incident happens. And of course, suddenly this becomes a national issue. And out of nowhere, we're seeing this eruption of anger and violence and buildings burning and inner cities are getting trashed. And as we discussed last time, the whole connection with Berkshire Hathaway, the insurance and all of this. So we're into this whole chaos that's been created chaos. So as that starts to die down, and it did, what happens next? Suddenly we have the reemergence of, we need to destroy all the statues of the South and tear that down, right? And so that's an easy one to inflame because this reminds us of slavery. Actually, that's where I really say no. It should remind us of a couple of things. It should remind us of a noble fight by the southern states to have state sovereignty. And two, it should remind us of a very painful time in our history that we should never forget on many levels. Not just the Civil War and the pain that is left from that from generation to generation, but the true issue, which took years past the Civil War to fix, which was racial inequality and slavery.
Again, Pastor Scott, there are two individuals that come to my mind before we get further into the George Floyd catastrophe. Because as a side note, I really believe that the death of George Floyd and the reaction thereof is nothing more than a CIA psyop for two reasons. One, to destroy President Donald J. Trump. And number two, I believe that these devils on the left want to totally emasculate the Constitution, to destroy it, to strip us down so that they can rebuild America to become a communistic caliphate. But before we get into further concerning the George Floyd catastrophe, because it was a manufactured crisis, and to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners all over the world, we are so very honored to be listening to this great man of God, great teacher, great patriot, the Honorable Pastor Scott Kesterson from the Bards of War Ministries. And please go to his website right now, bardsofwar.fm, bardsofwar.fm, and also go to his second site, bardsofwarfilm.org, bardsofwarfilm.org. The paradigm of manipulation, the paralysis of emotion. Two individuals come to my mind. Solomon James Day Rothschild, okay, and who represented the Paris, France division of the Rothschild dynasty. And his agent in the United States was a man by the name of Salmon P. Chase, who was the founder and the creator of what we call the Chase Manhattan Bank today. So then Salmon P. Chase served as the Secretary of the Treasury for President Abraham Lincoln from 1861 to 1864. But at the same time, Salmon P. Chase, with Rothschild money, was supplying the South at the same time. So in other words, with the backing of the Rothschild dynasty, they were subsidizing both North and South during the Civil War. And it's a game, man of God, that the deep state, that these deep state devils are continuing playing. They're subsidizing both sides. Am I correct in saying this, my friend?
Absolutely. I mean, this is what you just stated is literally the game right there. We have banking funding each side, which is, if anybody knows the symbol, and I know you do, the Ouroboros, which is the dragon with its tail in its mouth, or the snake with its tail in its mouth.
Yes.
Both ends to the middle, constantly putting and pitting people against one another so that people don't see what's going on. And as you do that, you literally have societies warring and destroying themselves. This is such a principal issue to the measures of control that have been in place from the beginning and from the fallen. And once they begin to teach the forbidden technologies and tools, then what's happened is that they use that to pit man against each other and to take control of man and to strip man's sovereignty and free will so that man would willingly give their allegiance and their faith to the fallen, which were the false idols. That was never the intent of God. I mean, that was the intent, was that we had sovereignty and free will to ultimately love and come back to Him by our own choice. But that's the one piece that they must always fight to prevent. That by creating hate, by creating anger, by creating fear, by creating blood rifts for generations, they control God's children constantly by constantly pitting us against each other, so that we see race when color was never God's issue. We see difference in attitude, ideologies, beliefs, when in fact we're all of a common milk. We are given different gifts. That's how we're to live. We're given gifts to excel and to reach and to aspire to greatness within whatever range and limit we have. And it's by our own choice that we come back to Him, but not when in their choice, because by the true fight that we understand through the book of Enoch, the rift fell when who we call Lucifer today wanted man to worship him. And God said, no, we need to have, these children need to learn to worship, learn to grow, and make a choice to come back and love me. And that's where the rift begins. And it continues on through generations. So we get to the George Floyd incident, and this is a very interesting one. I don't remember how much we got into this last week, but I've done some interesting research, and this is how manipulated what you've just described actually is. The George Floyd incident has some very peculiar characteristics about it. We have a video that's taken of a police officer that has his knee on a man's neck, who we call George. The problem we have is, the first question one has to ask is, how did this explode so fast over the global social media network, and why was the media pushing it so hard? We have murders every day. I get that. And the question, it's the most amazing thing that always happens, and I will start with this, is we always seem to have a camera present. There is a horrible racial incident happening. But we never seem to have a camera when there's a child being abducted, when there's a woman when there's an elderly person being abused and abducted. Seldom do we have a camera for that. Seldom do we have a camera when a police officer shoots anybody other than a Black American. And it's just a point that I'm making, that it really doesn't make a lot of sense in many ways. And again, this is one of the issues we have to address, which is, as the Democrat Party has managed to destroy the Black American family, I mean, destroy it.
Yes.
We also end up with a culture that has evolved where crime is the highest level of crime of any group in the nation. And so when you have the highest proportion of crimes, you are interacting with the police more than anybody else. There is an inherent social and cultural bias that is built into there, which they're calling systemic racism. They manufactured it. It's not normal. They manufactured the whole thing. I mean, what happens when you rip away fathers and you break families and you push drugs into those communities and you destroy the cultural fabric of what those communities are? You create chaos, bottom line. So as we push into this, and we have the question that happens then is, how does this happen so quickly? So something happened over the weekend that was very puzzling to me until I dug into it. And this is what it was. Suddenly, trending on Twitter was the name George Lloyd. Not Floyd, but Lloyd. And one of the posts in there said that, oops, I made a mistake. I misspelled George Lloyd, and now it's trending. Well, that sounded reasonable until I dug into it. This was being repeated by Black Lives Matter activists. It was being repeated by all sorts. It was even full articles written by media personnel that were using George Lloyd in the article. There were in the internet searches, if you search George Floyd, you would find the internet images with George Floyd under the photo, and then you click on the photo and click into the article, and it would say George Floyd. So what were we looking at? And this is pretty much what I've come to a conclusion of, verified by a couple other people that I'm on the right track anyway. What I believe we have just witnessed was the first of its kind artificial intelligence cyber insurgency. Once this happened, they typed in the key parameters and the artificial intelligence was let loose. It literally wrote most of the social media stuff that we saw. Many of the news articles was literally being written by an artificial intelligence. And somewhere in there, the Lloyd and the Floyd got flipped. I don't know if that's because it came from China or because someone typed it in wrong. But we literally witnessed a completely artificial event. I'm not even sure that what we witnessed was real. This is the problem we get to. And that leads into something in Minnesota that we'll get to in a minute. But the whole question is, what did we really witness? What we know is that with this particular youth that is separated from faith in God, where it is driven by its emotions, not in the stability that faith and prayer give us. Instead, it's an immediate reaction. And they respond with a quick trigger that someone else has been another police incident, and they're able to dial that up very quickly, just like they had already proven they could do with COVID-19. What COVID-19 ends up being, the social experiment, you condense people into their homes, you take them away from schools. Why else would a Democrat want schools closed? Because you've taken the kids away from their social environments, and now you have this activist element that's in your society, and all you need is a spark to trigger it, and that was the incident, and it did. And they didn't have to have journalists write most of this. You had an AI, artificial intelligence, writing a large percentage of the social media that was out there. Then you launch your Antifa element, which was a trained terrorist cell going in and working its way in and around and mixing in with the protesters to burn things down. In a true sheeple reality and the fury of the moment, people get wrapped up in the group sociology and psychology of it, and they then cheer on all these horrible events that are going on. We continue that thrust forward. We have elements that are truly wanting to protest for change. I have no problem with that. Be very clear about this. And I have no issue about protesting what we witnessed, whatever the truth of it is the question. Okay? But peaceful protest. But now we're running a full-on insurgency against not just the event, but as you pointed out, it's an insurgency against the Constitution. This is where we have to draw a line, because the Constitution is drafted for people to be able to have free speech. It doesn't say you can use a political insurgency to overthrow the Constitution freely within the country. That's a revolution. And that's where our lines get very blurred here, because we think too much in terms of militant types revolutions, not in terms of this sort of thing we're witnessing right here, especially when we run the money. Most of the money from Black Lives Matter that's being collected is being collected through, I'm trying to get the name of the place here, hang on just a second. It's through Act Blue, okay? Act Blue. Act Blue is handling the majority of its money to the Democrat Party. Getting money from the Black Lives Matter movement is passing as a pass-through, going to Bernie 2020, Biden president, Elizabeth Warren, Pete of America, Democrat Congressional Campaign. They're using this as a funding tool for their own party. But now watch this. This is really interesting. George Floyd. They have now raised through a GoFundMe $12,992,700. Okay? The casket is a gold casket.
Yeah.
And now we're going to go right back to the fallen, because this is the part I love. I don't really love it. I just am admiring the masters of the Lucifer for their stuff. That casket is a gold casket, which estimates have were as high as $13.2 million for that casket.
Sheesh.
Okay.
Wow.
But here's the best piece. What was the name of the casket model. It was called the Promethean. Who is Prometheus? Prometheus is the god of fire. It's the Greek god of fire, Prometheus. And Prometheus was one of the fallen in their mythology. Prometheus broke from Zeus, who was God over all, and taught the humans the forbidden technologies. He taught them fire, and ultimately Prometheus was the one who brought chaos into the world. That's what the casket was called. So this takes us back, and right back to where you started this, which is Kobe's death. January 27th, when Kobe's helicopter supposedly died. We went into that in a previous episode. But what's important about this is what ensues is we've talked about how Kobe was a viper by symbology, and how he was the black mamba, to be blunt, black mamba, with the most deadly of all, which is symbolic of the ability to recruit, in my opinion, the ability to recruit children and youth. He was sacrificed. We've talked about that at length.
Yes.
But on February 2nd is the Super Bowl, and it is all about the worship. In their halftime show was the worship of the Greek gods of chaos. And here we are again with Prometheus in the middle of this event.
Again, you hitting nerves with me, man of God. And what you just said has so much truth. It's all truth. I remember this past Tuesday, I was on Crowdsource the Truth. I'm a regular on Jason Goodman's show each and every Tuesday from 1 to 3 p.m. And what you just got done breaking down for us, I said the exact same thing. The only thing I did not know was the casket and its name and what it represents in Greek mythology. That my jaw is, I'm trying to pick up my jaw from the floor because, and can I say this too, Pastor Scott? And I talked about the origins of both Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Because a lot of people don't understand this, and you know this, man of God, that Antifa is the military arm of Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter is the propaganda arm of Antifa. Now, the very essence of Antifa, the structure, which means anti-fascist, right? And then that takes us to a Germanic word, action, capital A-K-T-I-O-N, which means action. There was a Nazi super spy before and during the advent of World War II. His name was Reinhard Gehlen. Reinhard Gehlen went on through Operation Paperclip to help establish the Central Intelligence Agency by absorbing the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, into the CIA. But at the same time, he was supplying data to the KGB. So as you and I had talked about, as you so powerfully articulated how both sides, North and South, South and North, are playing against each other, or subsidized, by the Rothschilds, right? Playing both sides. So Reinhard Gehlen, right before the end of World War II, created Antifa. Antifa is the creation of the former Nazi spy Reinhard Gehlen, who had created Antifa, because they hated fascism, and it was actually anti-fascist Soviets. But the flag of Antifa, red and black, is the official flag of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Wait a minute, I'm confused now. So then, so Antifa is both a Nazi psyop and a Bolshevik manifestation. And so President Trump was correct in labeling Antifa a terrorist organization. And I'm going to say this and get out of the way, man of God. There's a lot of African Americans going to be upset what I'm about to say. Not only is Antifa a terrorist organization, Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. It is a terrorist organization that's led by 3 Jezebels, who are also a part of the Black Secret Society of Sigma Pi Phi, or what we call the Boule Secret Society. You and I have talked about that entity so many times. But there's a woman by the name of Alicia Garza, okay, one of the 3 women who founded Black Lives Matter. And so she is a self-proclaimed Marxist. She said that in Wikipedia in the day following, okay, my interview with Jason Goodman. The following day on Wednesday, someone in her camp removed that verbiage where she said that she was a self-proclaimed Marxist. I've been getting thousands of emails since yesterday, Pastor Scott. So this Alicia Garza, okay, she is one of the 3 women who had created Black Lives Matter, okay? She is one of those women, and again, I'm not castigating them because they're women. I am exposing them because these are witches, okay? So this Alicia Garza, she is a member of Omega Phi Beta. Omega Phi Beta is one of the 9 Divine 9 Black Greek letter secret societies that's under the umbrella, Brother Scott, of Sigma Pi Phi. Omega Phi Beta is one of those 9 Black Greek letter secret societies that's under the umbrella of Sigma Pi Phi or Boule. So then this woman, Alicia Garza, and a known atheist and a racist, okay, and to you black folk out there, yes, there's racism in the black community. So Alicia Garza is a member of the Boule Secret Society, Omega Phi Beta. The second woman, Patrice Cullors, she is Omega Phi Beta, all right, a member also of the Boule Secret Society, because if a person is Omega Psi Phi male or Omega Phi Beta female, they're under the umbrella of the Boule Secret Society. And there's a third woman who is the creator. Her name is Opal Tometi. She is Nigerian. She's a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Society. That's one of the 9 Greek black letter secret societies that's under the umbrella of what we call the Pan-Hellenic Council, of the National Pan-Hellenic Council of 9 Black Greek fraternities and sororities. And as a sign up, the first 4 letters of sorority reveals the word sorrow, from which we get the term Soros. So what I'm saying, these women, and you brought up the Blue Project, these 3 women who are atheists, they hate the United States of America, okay? They support pedophilia. They support homosexuality. They support lesbianism. And I'm going to say this and then just get out of the way, because I believe that you're going to take us to a new level. You hit a nerve with me, man of God, a great nerve, concerning the this Blue Project, that Black Lives Matter is nothing more than a shell company. George Soros doesn't care about black people. Bill Gates doesn't care about black people. The Ford Foundation doesn't care about black people. But there are all these foundations, these corporations, and these initiatives are backing Black Lives Matter. It is a terrorist organization, okay? It is a CIA psyop. used to terrorize not just their own people, but Americans, period. What say you, man of God? Because, again, I'm going to say this, and you know what? People are going to say, Bishop, you're too harsh. Black Lives Matter must be destroyed. Let me say it again. Black Lives Matter, including Antifa, these entities must be destroyed. What say you, my friend?
Well, I want to read, so I'm going to start by reading Proverbs 26:26. I think this is relevant. So though his hatred covers itself with guile, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. This is a powerful statement to me because we are seeing this manipulation and the playing of people's emotions. But what is yet to be revealed is the true hatred that lives within there. And it will be revealed through the agents that they are using as what I call the agents of deception. I wrote something today, and I think it's striking, and it probably will, this is ultimately the end goal that we all have to keep in mind, that the entire reality, which we have come to know, is literally falling apart. That the United States that we grew up in, for everybody, is a myth. The people we have trusted are all corrupt. The institutions we relied on were stealing us blind, and the protections we counted on never existed. This is truly the Great Awakening, is for us to come to that realization. Because as we go through this process, the illusions are falling apart. But there's going to be always a group of people that hold on to these rigid beliefs. And this is the danger of where we sit. And I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. But I want to go back to something you said first, which is a reference to Antifa being both Bolshevik and German. That's an important understanding. That is not accidental. The Germans trained Lenin. They put him on a train. They shipped him into Russia, and they set him in play to destabilize the Tsar. They did so to create a front that, in the end, they had hoped to destabilize everything and then gain control over in time. It didn't quite work out that way, but nonetheless, Lenin was a German-trained agent provocateur, so to speak. So it's no surprise to me that the Bolsheviks, which Lenin won or led, and the Germans have a common concept of Antifa. That doesn't surprise me whatsoever. We are literally dealing with a continuation of this order. We follow the Nazis, they go to the Red Jews, they go into the area up near the Ukraine. I mean, all these, they're in our news now. And though they weren't called those things then, it's all there. We follow those trails of money. We follow the trails into Iran. That is the scene. We have the relations to King Solomon, and we have all of those there. All of this is in the same region because it's been going on. It's forever. It's for our sake. It's been going on, and it's all written in the Bible in its various forms. And it's for us to read the Bible and to use the most powerful tool God has given us, which is reason, which is to think, and to see through words, to see the bigger picture of the play that has been going on, this movie or this big play we've been part of because we've been puppeteered for generations.
Yes.
We are literally living through a time now when when the puppet masters are coming forward. We're seeing it every single day. There's a lot of fear right now with people. They are very much driven in fear. And they're angry, which is all normal. But the biggest piece that we all need to take some time with is that this is why, and in this moment in time, more than any time that we know, and I would argue even any time in history, faith is the most important piece, and prayer that we can have. Nowhere in these movements have we seen taking a knee with God. We talked about that last week. Instead, what we have seen is a bowing to what? That's the question no one's answering. What am I taking a knee and bowing to? What am I bowing my head to? I can tell you, and it's not God. Because going through that act, those manipulators are taking this herd of people and they're having them bow to a false idol. If you look at how much worship is going around George Floyd, his gold casket, the chariot ride was a different casket, by the way, which is a little bit odd because there wasn't the same casket inside of his chariot as it took him to the funeral. Not really sure what that's about, but again, this is all deceptions. And your worship, you're going to the whole thing of a worship ceremony. This is Deuteronomy 18:20. It's the warning of what happens when you worship false idols and you follow false prophets. It is the end is terminal. It's death. We're dividing humankind right now. We're splitting them off. And humankind is splitting to a point where we have literally those that are pushing back on this and saying this isn't right, and we have those that are violently trying to create chaos to bring the entire world down with them. It doesn't mean that they won't rise to power, but the question is who is going to hold fast in their faith and who's going to hold fast with their commitment to God. To me, this is a trial and a test. And I know, and whenever I use those words, many times people of Christian faith push back and say God doesn't test us. I don't agree. Life is put before us to trial us through trials to find out where we sit. And we are in the middle of a spiritual war, quite literally. We are in the process of being ripped and separated apart. So we are being pushed to a point of having to look at where this is going. So we get into a little bit more of the George Floyd incident, and I'm going to slip out into this back to this idea of the dual, of this sort of split. The George Floyd incident, there's a company in Minnesota that was burned down, and it's 7 Sigma. Now, what's interesting about 7 Sigma is they just happen to make dummies for medical training. They just so happen one of them looks a whole lot like George Floyd. I'm just saying. I'm not saying people out here full of I'm crazy. You go ahead and think I'm crazy, except that when we finally got some pictures of the gurney when he was picked up, it's just odd that the man had no legs. What happened to George Floyd's legs? That's what I'd like to know, because they're not there on the gurney. Right. And the last time I checked, he wasn't run over by a car, and he wasn't an invalid when he was there. Okay, there's also the issue that was there on the ground that didn't have the tattoos that George Floyd did. Now, maybe the man went to a tattoo removal shop and got them removed. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. But it still needs to be answered. You see, we can't. This is where the emotions blind us, because when we get spun up with emotions, we cease to have rational thought. And when we don't have rational thought, we lose one of the most powerful tools that God gave us, which is reason. People say many times, well, I never question God. I'm going to be honest to everybody. I do. Because if something comes into my life, that is part of the relationship, of a true relationship with God, which is to pose the question, what does this mean? What are you trying to do with me here? What am I looking at? Because that's eyes to see, ears to hear, breath to speak. So it is part of our gift of being human to reason. It isn't to be insulting. It doesn't say to burn the building down. It says to reason. And when we get fear, fear blinds us. The whole process of that, we cease to think clearly, and fear is the number one agent that severs our relationship through faith with God. It is the opposite of connecting with God, and when we do that, we immediately get sucked into the control of those that control the earth, ultimately the Luciferians, and they feed off of it. They suck us in. And you cease to have a rational way of looking at things, and then you're easily manipulated through more images, which ties us back to the artificial intelligence. How hard is it to manipulate the way people see when everything that they're looking at is coming through selective media feeds of the same type of people they want to hear? They don't want to hear the other side.
Yeah.
You've stovepiped everything that you want to look at through one lens, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, whatever it is. Well, you're just more images dumped into those hashtags, and you see one optic on the world. But you have to dig. You have to look behind. you have to start asking questions. Just like the image in the Captain America film, the last one, and the image of Times Square. When you look at the image and you look into the background, there is a Corona beer. There is also an image on a billboard of a coronavirus. We call that subliminals. But because they've become so sophisticated at this, because a subliminal by definition means that you can't see it because it's like one frame put in the spacing of about every 16 frames. They don't do it that way. They just put it in there so your subconscious is picking it up. You're preconditioned to accept coronavirus. This whole thing has been a psyop. It's been engineered over decades to get us to this point of a culmination event where people will willingly give away their sovereignty and their free will, and in the process destroy the one thing the Luciferians fear the most, which is faith in God, and then introduce their one world religion to bind us, not unify us, but to bind us to them.
And I put up a posting. We had Pastor Scott Kesterson back with us. Again, I'm being blown away by you, my friend. 609-614-3801. Again, quickly, beloved, 609-614-3801. We're going to take a 2-minute break, and then during hour number 2, there's something else that I want to share with our Global Spiritual Revolution partners that I noticed during the funeral procession, right? Of the funeral process of George Floyd that disturbed me, okay? And I'm looking at this through the lens of the anointing, through the mind of God. The funeral procession is something there that I don't think the common individual will even notice. So during hour number 2, we're going to break that down and expose these Luciferian Baphomet puppet masters who are pulling the emotional strings of not just Black America, but all of those who are part of this conspiracy. We will see you in about 2 minutes' time with Pastor Scott Kesterson here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.